They say time heals everything, but in the room where Grace used to sleep, there are no clocks, no ticking, no reminders of what's been lost, no mercy. I used to think silence was peaceful. Now I know it's just what's left when the truth stops pretending. This isn't a love story, it's a confession about the woman who taught me what it meant to stop running. And the night I realized that some people don't leave because they want to. They leave because the world doesn't give them another choice. Chapter 1: A city without mornings. The city always felt louder after midnight. Horns, engines, laughter spilling out of bars like broken glass. But inside my apartment on the 14th floor, it was the opposite, still sharp and suffocating. The kind of quiet that lets your thoughts echo back at you until you start mistaking them for voices. I'd been working late shifts at Morrison & Associates for 3 years, debugging code, while the rest of the world slept. My colleagues joked that I was becoming nocturnal, but the truth was simpler. Daylight reminded me of conversations I didn't want to have, of my sister's voicemails asking why I missed another family dinner, of my ex-roommate Jake who'd moved out saying I was emotionally unavailable. That was the night I met Grace. Not in a romantic way, not at first. She worked in the same building, different floor, something in market research, always carrying those thick manila folders with color-coded tabs. She was one of those people who never quite fit the tempo of the world around her. Too calm, too quiet, too perceptive, like she could hear the static behind every conversation. I noticed her because she noticed everything. The way she'd pause before answering, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. The way her eyes lingered on people's hands instead of their faces, like she was reading stories written in gestures. The way she'd sit at her desk after everyone else had gone, staring out the window while absently braiding and unbraiding a section of her dark hair. Always the same section, always 3 twists, like she was waiting for something that never came. We started talking in the elevator. Small talk at first, rain traffic, the coffee machine on the 5th floor that ate quarters. But I noticed she had this habit of finishing my sentences in her head. I could see her lips move slightly, mouthing words I hadn't said yet. "You drink your coffee black," she said one Thursday evening, watching me juggle my laptop bag and steaming cup. "Lucky guess, not luck. Your fingers. People who take cream hold their cups differently, more carefully." She demonstrated with her own cup, pinky extended slightly, like they're protecting something precious. It was such a small observation, but it hit me like recognition. This woman saw details the world overlooked. One night, after a late meeting about quarterly projections that could have been an email, she followed me out onto the street instead of turning left toward the subway. "Do you ever feel like you're just performing?" she asked, pulling her wool coat tighter against the October wind. "Like everyone else got a script for how to be a person, and you're just improvising?" The question hit too close to the center of everything I'd been avoiding. All the time, I admitted. "I thought so." She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "You get this look in meetings, like you're translating everything into a different language before you respond." That's how it began. 2 people pretending they weren't both falling apart, sharing cigarettes under the flickering streetlight outside Moretti's Deli, talking about everything except the reasons we both worked until the building emptied. But the thing about Grace was this: she didn't fill silence. She made you sit in it, made you feel what you'd buried. When other people got uncomfortable with quiet moments, Grace would close her eyes and breathe deeply, like she was savoring something rare. "Silence has texture," she told me once. "This corner has different silence than your office, different than the subway platform. You have to learn to read it." She came over one night after a storm knocked out power across half the block. My apartment was dim, candles, shadows, rain drumming against the glass. She laughed softly when she saw the stack of whiskey glasses on the counter, all clean but waiting. "You drink like you're toasting ghosts," she said, running her finger around the rim of one glass. "Maybe I am. What would you toast them for?" "For leaving," I said without thinking, then felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Sorry, that's..." "Don't apologize." She poured 2 fingers of bourbon into the glass. "To leaving, then. And to staying long enough to matter." She stayed until morning. Not like lovers do, not yet. Just 2 people orbiting the same wound, pretending it didn't hurt to get close. I woke to find her making coffee with the precision of a chemist, measuring grounds, timing the pour, testing the temperature with the back of her wrist, like my grandmother used to do. "You have good water pressure," she said, handing me a cup. "Most city apartments don't. Means this building is older than it looks." "How do you know that?" "My father was a contractor. Before." She paused, that familiar tilt of her head, "before he decided buildings weren't worth fixing anymore." Chapter 2: Learning her language. Days turned into weeks, and Grace started showing up without calling. Always carrying something small, a book with dozens of bookmarks, herbal tea that smelled like rain, a small succulent in a ceramic pot she'd painted with tiny stars. "I'm not good at staying," she said one evening, arranging the plant on my windowsill. "But I'm learning." "Who taught you that you weren't good at it?" I asked. She was quiet for so long I thought she hadn't heard me. Then, someone who made promises he couldn't keep, said he'd always come back, said leaving was just temporary. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Turned out temporary was just another word for forever. I wanted to ask more, but Grace had this way of closing doors gently but completely. Instead, I watched her tend to the plant, her movements careful and practiced. I asked, I don't name things anymore. Names make you expect them to stay. She'd drop her canvas messenger bag on the couch, always the same corner, always with the strap folded just so, and sit cross-legged on my floor, asking impossible questions while she sorted through her folders with the intensity of an archivist. What if loneliness isn't something to fix? What if it's just something to learn how to hold? Do you think people leave because they want to, or because they don't know how to stay? If you could stop time at any moment, would you choose the beginning or the end? Sometimes I'd catch her tracing her fingers over the clock on my wall, an old brass thing my grandmother had left me, the one that had stopped ticking weeks earlier after I'd forgotten to wind it. Why haven't you fixed it? She asked once, her fingertip following the curve of the hour hand. Because it reminds me that time doesn't care about what we want. She smiled faintly, that almost smile that never quite reached her eyes. Or maybe it's trying to tell you something about stopping. I didn't understand what she meant until much later. The shift happened gradually, like seasons changing. I'd find myself staying late at work not to avoid going home, but because I knew Grace might be there when I arrived, sitting by my window with her legs tucked under her, reading one of the poetry books she carried everywhere. She had this habit of reading lines out loud, testing how they sounded in the air. Listen to this, she'd say, and her voice would transform the words into something physical, something that settled in your chest and stayed there. It wasn't love at first. It was recognition, like two people seeing the same scar on each other and pretending not to notice how it still hurt to touch. But love has a way of creeping in through the cracks you thought were sealed. One night in November, I found her standing by the window again, watching the rain turn the street lights into watercolor smears. She didn't turn when she spoke, her breath fogging the glass. I used to have someone, she said. Someone who said he loved the way I saw things differently. Said it made me special. Her laugh was bitter, right up until it made me difficult. Grace. He promised he'd come back from deployment. Wrote letters about the house we'd buy, the garden I'd plant. Said he loved how I noticed details other people missed. Her voice cracked slightly. Turned out he just loved the idea of someone waiting for him. When he came back, I was too real, too much work. She finally turned toward me, and the city lights reflected in her eyes. Blue, soft, endless, and full of something that looked like apology. Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay when everything inside you is screaming? Every single day, I whispered. And then she kissed me, slow, deliberate, fragile, like she was asking permission to exist again, to take up space in someone else's world without apologizing for it. That night, time stopped completely, and the clock in the kitchen never ticked again. Chapter 3, The Room with No Clocks. Grace started spending most nights at my place after that. She'd bring over small things, a second coffee mug with a chip in the handle, a throw blanket that smelled like lavender, a box of Earl Grey tea that she'd steep for exactly 4 minutes, no more, no less. It wasn't the stuff itself, it was what it meant. She was claiming space quietly, like sunlight creeping through blinds you didn't remember opening. She had routines that became part of my world, checking the locks twice before bed, arranging her shoes so they pointed toward the door, leaving her reading glasses on the nightstand, even though she only needed them for fine print. Small rituals that spoke of someone who'd learned not to settle in too completely. I like your apartment, she said one evening, curled up on my couch with her tea. It doesn't try to impress anyone. It just is. Is that a compliment? It's the highest compliment I know how to give, but something was changing in her, like shadows shifting when clouds pass over the sun. There were mornings I'd wake to find her sitting in the dark living room, fully dressed, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. When I'd ask if she was okay, she'd say she couldn't sleep, that the silence was too loud. Sometimes I hear him calling my name, she admitted one night, her voice barely audible. Even though I know it's impossible. Even though I know he's probably forgotten what I look like by now. The soldier. David. His name was David. She pulled my blanket tighter around her shoulders. He used to say my name like it was something sacred. Like it mattered. I wanted to tell her that her name mattered to me too, but the words felt too heavy, too soon. Instead, I just held her until her breathing evened out, until the tension left her shoulders. She told me once, while we were making breakfast and she was methodically cutting strawberries into perfect eighths. When I was little, my father used to stop all the clocks in our house every Sunday. He said it made the nights last longer, Gave us more time before Monday came and he had to go back to job sites that were slowly killing him. Did it work? For a while, until I realized time doesn't actually stop just because you're not measuring it. It just makes you forget how much you're losing. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just reached for her hand sticky with strawberry juice and held it. That's how it was with Grace. Half answers, unfinished sentences, long silences heavy enough to drown in. But I was learning her language, the way she communicated in gestures and implications, in the books she left open to specific pages, in the way she'd hum songs I'd never heard but somehow knew. Then one evening in January she didn't show up. No call, no text. Just absence where her presence should have been. At first I thought she needed space. Grace had always been like a cat, appearing and disappearing according to her own logic. But when my coworker Marcus mentioned seeing her cleaning out her desk during lunch, something cold settled in my stomach. By the third day I went to her apartment building, a converted brownstone in Prospect Heights where she rented a studio on the 4th floor. The landlord, a tired-looking man with paint under his fingernails, said she checked out 2 days ago. Did she leave a forwarding address? Nope. Paid through the end of the month, packed light. Seemed like she was used to moving quick. What do you mean? He shrugged. Some people collect stuff. She lived like she was always ready to leave. Smart if you ask me. Things just weigh you down. When I got back home, her tea was still on the counter, half empty and cold, her book still on my nightstand, bookmarked at a poem about temporary things. And the clock in the living room, the one she always touched, had fallen from the wall, its brass face cracked right down the middle. I tried to fix it, rewinding the mechanism, adjusting the hands. But every time I set it running, the hands would freeze at 2017, the exact minute she'd first kissed me, when the world had stopped and I'd thought it was magic rather than warning. Chapter 4. After the city felt different without Grace in it. Colors seemed muted, sounds too sharp. I started seeing her everywhere after that. Reflections in rain, streaked windows, footsteps in empty hallways, the faint scent of her lavender tea lingering in the elevator after the doors closed. My sister Amy called more frequently, her voice careful with the kind of concern that comes after someone's told you to be worried. Jake says you look like hell, she said during one of our stilted phone conversations. Says you're drinking too much, working too little. Jake moved out 6 months ago. What does he know? He cares about you. We all do. Maybe you should talk to someone about whatever this is. But how do you explain to a therapist that you're grieving someone who might have been real? How do you describe the weight of missing someone who left no trace, no forwarding address, no proof they existed except for the empty space they carved out of your chest? I stopped going to work regularly, started sleeping through meetings, missing deadlines. My boss, Jennifer, was patient at first. Everyone goes through rough patches, she said. But patience has limits, especially in a company where billable hours matter more than human frailty. My apartment turned into a museum of moments I couldn't let go of. Her half-empty teacup that I couldn't bring myself to wash. The throw blanket still carrying the faint scent of her shampoo. Her reading glasses forgotten on the nightstand like a promise to return. The plant she'd brought died slowly. I watched it with her, unable to care for it the way she had, unable to throw it away. Then one night in March, I woke to the sound of something shifting in the dark. A whisper, faint, right behind me, Dean. It was her voice, soft, familiar, that particular way she'd say my name when she was half asleep. But when I turned, there was nothing there, just empty space in the broken clock which had somehow started ticking again. Tick, tick. Steady and relentless, counting moments I couldn't get back. Chapter 5 investigation days blurred into each other after that. Sometimes I'd wake at exactly 20:17 a.m., heart racing. Convinced she was sitting at the edge of the bed, I'd reach out and the air would feel cold where her hand should be, like reaching through water. I started talking to her out loud. Not because I believed she could hear me, but because silence had become unbearable and her absence was louder than any sound. Where did you go, Grace? Was I supposed to stop you? Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? The walls never answered, but the clock kept ticking, slow, deliberate, cruel in its consistency. I became obsessed with finding traces of her. I went back to her old building, questioned neighbors, searched online for Grace with a dozen different last names. Nothing. I called the market research firm where I thought she worked. They had no record of anyone matching her description. One morning, desperate and slightly drunk on too much coffee and too little sleep, I finally went to her old address again. The landlord had changed, younger guy distracted by his phone, uninterested in my questions. Grace? Nah, man, nobody by that name. I've been managing this building for 2 years. Unit 4B's been empty since October. Water damage from the unit above. Hasn't been habitable? That's impossible. I was here. I saw her apartment. He shrugged, already turning away. Maybe you got the wrong building. Happens all the time in this neighborhood. But I knew it was the right building. I remembered the broken step on the third floor, the way the hallway light flickered, the number on her door written in faded gold script. I climbed the stairs anyway, to the fourth floor, to what should have been her door. It was sealed with yellow tape, deepened stamped across a notice dated 6 months earlier. Through a gap in the boards covering the window, I could see inside water, stained walls, ceiling tiles hanging like broken teeth. The kind of damage that takes months to accumulate. Standing in that empty hallway, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of reality. Either the landlord was lying, or I was losing my mind, or Grace had never existed the way I thought she did. Chapter 6 Confession. I'm writing this because someone has to know she existed. Because even if she was never flesh and bone, even if she was something I created out of loneliness and need, she changed me. She mattered. I know what people will think, that she was a hallucination, a projection of everything I wanted but couldn't find in real people. Maybe they're right. Maybe Grace was something the city gave me to survive the nights I almost didn't. Maybe she was my mind's way of practicing love before I forgot how to feel it entirely. But every time the rain starts, the air in my apartment still shifts, just slightly. The clock stops. The world holds its breath. And for a few seconds, I feel her there again, sitting cross-legged on my floor, asking impossible questions that don't have answers. I used to think love was supposed to save you. But maybe it just shows you who you were before you forgot how to feel. Maybe it teaches you that some people exist in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between words, in the moment right before you fall asleep when anything seems possible. Grace didn't heal me. She reminded me that I was bleeding. And then she disappeared, taking time with her, leaving only the echo of her voice and the memory of what it felt like to be seen completely. I quit my job at Morrison & Associates. Started working freelance, choosing projects that let me work with my hands, fixing things that were broken. It's not much, but it's honest work. The kind of work that leaves you tired in a good way, the kind Grace would have understood. I kept her plant. Found a way to nurse it back to health, learned the exact amount of water and sunlight it needed. It's thriving now, small white flowers blooming in a pattern that looks almost like stars. I still don't name it. Some things are too precious for words. Now, every clock in this apartment is gone. I threw them out months ago, donated them to the thrift store on 7th Avenue where an elderly woman with kind eyes promised they'd find good homes. Because when you stop measuring hours, you stop expecting anything to change. You learn to exist in the present moment, which is all any of us really have anyway. People still ask why I live alone, why I work at night, why I never talk about the woman in the photograph on my desk. The one no one else remembers taking, the one that shows empty space where she should be standing. And I just say the only truth I have left, she left when the clocks stopped. Because some loves don't end when people leave. They end when the world erases the evidence that they were ever here. But the absence they leave behind has its own weight, its own presence, its own way of making you remember what it means to be alive. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, maybe you understand. Maybe you've loved someone who existed in the spaces between certainty and doubt. Maybe you know what it means to grieve something that was never quite real, but felt more true than anything else in your life. I still hear her sometimes in the rain against the window, in the silence between songs, in the moment right before I fall asleep. And I've stopped asking whether she was real. Because the love was real. The change was real. The way she taught me to see the world differently, that was real. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.